Welcome to my first Riverside Chat of 2024 here at the American River. And this is January 3rd, 2024. And I'm still in the mood to talk about the 60th anniversary of things because 2024 marks the 60th anniversary of Beatlemania, the British invasion, and a lot of people were influenced by that, whether they were kids at that time or grown-ups or became kids later on, and like I was, and looked back on it, and still the Beatles are my favorite group. You know, I would say that I really didn't start listening to them until 1978. I knew who they were, and even as a kid I knew who they were from the cartoon The Beatles. But probably by 74 I became really aware of a lot of their songs, but it wasn't until 78 that I really got into them deeply and got into all their albums. So that was 8 years after they broke up. Anyway, 1964, that's a magical year in history for many reasons, and I want to get back to something I had talked about in an earlier Riverside Chat about the 60th anniversary of Louie Louie by the Kingsmen becoming a hit. It reached the peak of its popularity on the charts in January, same month as the Beatles started having big hits like I Wanna Hold Your Hand. So it's just an interesting period to look back on because it's kind of a time marker when society changed. And the Beatles started off as like really innocent, fun party music, and eventually they became social commentary visionaries who experimented in the studio and came up with music that had never been done before. So that's why the Beatles are so special. I mean, they wrote so many unique songs. And you can say that, yeah, a lot of them were based on traditional styles, but they had their own unique twist on every song they put out. So they went against the grain of pop music at that time. At the time, you know, there were lots of 30s and 40s covers because kind of the older scene had overtaken rock and roll again. And so you had lots of cover songs between like 58 to 63. And even when the Beatles came on, they did covers, but not going, well, they did a few way back songs like Ain't She Sweet was from the 1920s. And they did My Bonnie, which was like 1890s or something like that, way back. But those were early Beatles songs. And one of the other things is, it's so funny that television ultimately overshadowed like music and politics and everything, movies, because it was right there in your living room. Yet people don't really remember television shows, I think, as much as they remember songs like Louie Louie. In other words, Louie Louie is a much more universal song, even for people not of that era, for lots of people of all ages to embrace. Whereas the #1 TV show of that period, the Beverly Hillbillies on CBS, it was #1 its first 2 seasons, and then its last 7 seasons was not #1, but was sometimes in the top 10. But anyway, it lasted from like 1962 to 1971. And on that show, the Beverly Hillbillies, this is why I'm bringing this up, because this show is usually about the history of Sacramento, and sometimes how it pertains to the American River, because that was the birth of the gold rush. There's a lot of gold rush fever still going on all these years later, and a lot of it like has to do with fame and fortune. So we look back at Sacramento people who attained fame and fortune, and one of those persons was actor Max Baer Jr. He was not originally from Sacramento, originally from Oakland, California, but grew up in Sacramento because his dad, world boxing champion Max Baer Sr., lived in Sacramento from like the late 20s through the time of his death in the late 50s. And what's interesting about Max Baer Sr. is he was a movie star, a Hollywood movie star. Now, Max Baer Jr., he played Jethro on the Beverly Hillbillies, the #1 TV show of 1962 and 1963, those seasons. Yeah, Jethro had that southern accent, and in fact they all did. The Clampett family and then Jethro and all them, they all had like southern accents. They came from the South, supposedly, on the TV show. But you know, Max Baer, he's an actor. That was just acting. He doesn't really have a southern accent. Although after the Beverly Hillbillies, he got into movie production, and he went on to become a multi-millionaire film producer and actor. And I don't know if people are that much aware of his work anymore, but in 1974 he had the most profitable film of the year, and that was called Macon County Line. And he starred in it and he produced it, and it was an independent film. And that's interesting to me because I love studying indie stuff, like The Kingsman. Louie Louie was an indie record. I favor independent small businesses. That's what I've been throughout my career. And I've worked for several indie organizations. So anyway, he was an indie film producer and actor, and he's 2024, he's still alive at age 86. He's the only one from the show left alive today as I record this video. But what's interesting about Macon County Line is, okay, he set kind of a new standard for indie films, how you can actually do low budget stuff and be very profitable at the box office. Like his budget for the film was, I've read different statistics, but it was low for the time, like 100,000, somewhere around there. It might have been 200,000, but it ended up grossing 25 million plus. Okay, like 25 million. I think it was like 18 million is what North America made, and then 25 to 30 million is what the global numbers were for the movie Macon County Line. Now I've only watched scenes of it on YouTube, so I'm not that much of a movie goer, to be honest. So I do research on specific certain movies and certain movie companies and movie stars, but I myself am not an expert in the world of movies like I am about music. Like, I know a lot about music and only so much about movies. However, I know a lot about the movie industry and its history. And that's what I'm kind of sharing in these videos, is just history information, especially pertaining to Sacramento. And so, because Max Baer Jr. grew up in Sacramento, you know, I think that's important for Sacramentans to know that his dad was also a Hollywood star, and that he actually did a radio show in Sacramento. He hosted I believe a music show, like a DJ type format show on KFBK AM back 1951 to 1953, and you can check out some of those recordings. He also did lots of interviews with movie stars on those radio shows. And you could actually check out those recordings on the Center for Sacramento History, which is owned by the city of Sacramento. And so Max Baer Jr. Still around. He lives in Nevada. I think he might live in Carson City. I know he owns some property there that he wanted to open a casino there, and also I guess a casino slash theater and other things, like a big venue there. But I don't know what's happened with that. There was talk of that years ago. But I believe he still has that on his back burner. Anyway, Macon County Line, what an interesting tidbit about that film is that it was billed as a true story. Now, this was a murder story about like a murder and rape of a character's wife, the lead character played by Max Baer, who didn't use Jr. on his credits. He basically, I mean, did good acting from what I could tell, really strong acting. However, it was one of those films that just went along with what the public wants, I think. Okay, in other words, lots of sex and violence and guns, and kind of maybe a formula movie. Like, I don't know if it had any social message to it. If you've seen it and you think it has some deep message, let me know. Send me a message. But I just want to point out that just in spite of that, I think he's an historic figure to Sacramento because he spent a lot of time here, and he wound up in the movie industry, and he became a multi-millionaire. You know, not on the level of Tom Hanks, who I'll talk about on another episode. Tom Hanks went to Sac State. I went to Sac State. That's our connection. But I don't know if I have any connection with Max Baer Jr. or Sr. But it is interesting that Max Baer Sr. did a radio show in Sacramento, and that he was already had been a Hollywood movie star. Did several films. Anyway, 60 years ago, the Beverly Hillbillies, #1 show in America, all about Southerners who struck it rich with oil. And so they moved to Beverly Hills, and then suddenly, that was one of the shows that kind of made California a very popular state. Like early 60s, like around 62 was the year California became the most populated. It replaced New York as the most populated state in America. And so there were shows and songs, and Beverly Hillbillies, that made it sound like, hey, California's where it's at, you know. Along with the Beach Boys and a lot of stuff that broke out in 1963, leading into Beatlemania of 1964. And I'll talk more about that on another Riverside Chat.